I had always thought of myself as an ordinary guy, just another cog in the vast machine of the corporate world. I had a job at a medium-sized tech company, a job that paid the bills and kept me out of trouble. The kind of job that doesn't ask too many questions and in return lets you keep your head down and focus on your work. It was supposed to be simple, but of course, nothing in life ever stays that simple. I started working for Cavarious Technologies about 2 years ago. The company was an emerging player in the tech world, and they promised to revolutionize industries with cutting-edge innovations. What drew me to them was the opportunity to work on new tech, biotech and cybernetics, fields I was genuinely passionate about. The pay was decent, the perks were good, and the people seemed friendly enough. But there was always a nagging feeling that something didn't quite fit. It wasn't that the company had any overtly suspicious practices. They followed the rules, they had tight security, and everything seemed above board on the surface. But the deeper I got into my role as a data analyst, the more I began to notice odd patterns, small anomalies that didn't make sense. Data entries would disappear. Memos would be erased. People would vanish from the office for days, sometimes weeks, only to return like nothing had happened with vague explanations for their absence. The real turning point came one fateful night when I was working late, trying to finish a report that had to be submitted first thing in the morning. I had just finished compiling some data when I noticed an email that wasn't meant for me. It was from Director Hayes, one of the higher-ups at the company, someone I had never interacted with directly. The subject line was cryptic, Project X Urgent. Curiosity got the better of me, and against every instinct that told me not to, I opened the email. At first glance, it seemed harmless enough. Hayes was communicating with an external contractor named Dr. Randolph, someone whose name I had never heard before. The email mentioned a batch of new samples and referenced final testing protocols. My first thought was that it was just some scientific stuff, nothing that would concern someone in my position. But then I noticed something strange in the attached file name. Genetic Modification Final Stage. That's when the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I had been around biotech long enough to know that genetic modification wasn't something you'd casually mention in an email, especially if it wasn't part of the company's public initiatives. My heart started racing as I opened the attachment. What I saw in the document was far worse than I could have ever imagined. The first page contained a series of experimental protocols. Terms like genetic editing, human enhancement, and DNA alteration jumped out at me. But it was the second page that made my blood run cold. There was a section detailing the use of employees as test subjects. Not just volunteers, not just lab rats, but actual company workers who had been subjected to genetic manipulation without their knowledge or consent. The names listed on the document weren't just random employees. They were people I recognized, coworkers who had disappeared without a trace. I had seen some of them in the halls only days before, but now, according to this report, they were listed as part of something called Project X, Human Enhancement Program. I could barely comprehend what I was reading, and for a moment I thought it was some sick joke. But as I read on, it became clear that this wasn't a joke. The project had been running for years, hidden deep within the company's operations. It was a highly classified initiative to experiment with gene editing technology on human beings, with the goal of creating enhanced super soldiers for military contracts. The scope of it was staggering. What started as a small, seemingly innocent tech company had turned into something much darker. The company wasn't just working on genetic editing for medical purposes, they were creating biological weapons. The workers who had been turned into test subjects were now living experiments, altered beyond recognition, their genetic makeup twisted into something else. Some had been changed so much they were practically unrecognizable, and no one had the faintest idea what had happened to them. My head spun as I tried to process what I was reading. I wasn't just working for a company anymore. I was working for an organization that was complicit in one of the most horrific human rights violations imaginable. And worse, I had unknowingly been a part of it. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been walking among monsters, completely unaware of the darkness lurking in the heart of the place I called work. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit on this information. But at the same time, I realized how dangerous it was to even think about acting on it. I had seen how the company dealt with leaks. People who had dared to question the way things were done simply disappeared. I wasn't sure whether it was the company's security forces or something more sinister that made those people vanish, but I wasn't willing to find out. But what choice did I have? That night, I made the decision to gather as much evidence as I could. I would need to expose them. I couldn't let this go on. The lives of innocent people were at stake. But I knew that if I did this, my life as I knew it would be over. The company wouldn't let me walk away from this. I would be their target. As I sat there, staring at the screen in disbelief, I realized that everything I thought I knew about the world had just crumbled, and there was no turning back. The weight of the situation settled on me like a cold, suffocating blanket. I had just uncovered the truth, the ugly, terrifying truth, but now came the hard part. What was I supposed to do with this knowledge? How could I expose a company like Cavarious Technologies, knowing they had the power to erase me from existence if I crossed them? I spent the next few days in a haze of fear and paranoia. Every time I walked into the office, I kept my head down, pretending like everything was normal. But inside, I was a mess. I couldn't stop thinking about those workers, the experiments, the lives that had been destroyed for some twisted corporate agenda. The fact that I was now aware of it made me a target, and I knew it wouldn't be long before I became expendable too. I had to act fast. The first step in my plan was simple: gather evidence. The document I found was just the tip of the iceberg. I needed more, much more. I started looking through old internal communications, digging through encrypted company servers. The more I searched, the more horrifying the details became. The scale of the experiments was beyond anything I could have imagined. Not only were they experimenting on employees, but they were also conducting human trials on people from third-world countries under the guise of humanitarian work. These volunteers were lured in with promises of a better life, only to be injected with untested gene-editing drugs and altered beyond recognition. The documents detailed everything: the pain, the suffering, and the irreversible damage done to the human body. But as I collected this evidence, I realized something even more chilling. I wasn't just a witness to this. I was part of it. My role as a data analyst meant I had access to all kinds of confidential files. I had seen things I shouldn't have, logged data that no one else was supposed to have access to. The more I thought about it, the more I understood how deep I was embedded in the company's operations. If I was caught with these files, I would be just another casualty in the company's war to protect its secrets. I couldn't stay at Cavarious. I had to leave. But escaping the company was not going to be as easy as simply walking out the door. They were too powerful, too well connected. If they suspected I was onto them, I would be gone without a trace, just like the others who had disappeared. My only option was to disappear first, to slip away before they even knew what hit them. The plan I devised was risky, but it was my only shot. I would leak everything I had uncovered to the press. It was a bold move, one that would ensure my life would never be the same again. But if I didn't expose them, I knew I would be living in fear for the rest of my life, constantly looking over my shoulder, never knowing when the company would come for me. To pull it off, I needed a contact, someone who would be able to help me get the information out without the company tracing it back to me. I thought about a few people I could trust, but none of them seemed like the right fit. Then I remembered Megan, a journalist I had met a year ago at a tech conference. She had a reputation for exposing corporate corruption, and I remembered her talking about the dark side of the biotech industry. She was the perfect person to help me bring Cavarious down. I reached out to Megan through an encrypted messaging app. I knew she was a journalist, but I didn't know if she would take me seriously. After all, I was just an anonymous employee from a mid-level tech company. But when I told her what I had discovered, when I gave her a glimpse into the madness that Cavarious was hiding, she agreed to meet with me. That night, I met her in a small cafe on the outskirts of town. We sat in the back, away from prying eyes, and I handed her a flash drive filled with all the evidence I had gathered. Her eyes widened as she scanned through the files, the horror and disbelief etched on her face. This is, she trailed off, unable to find the words. I could tell she was both shocked and terrified. She had seen corruption in the tech industry before, but nothing like this. This wasn't just corporate greed, this was a crime against humanity. I could see the gears turning in her head as she processed the information. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked me quietly. "Exposing something like this. They'll come after you, they'll come after everyone involved." I nodded. "I know. But I can't just pretend I didn't see it. I can't live with myself if I do nothing. The people they've hurt, they deserve justice." Megan stared at the files for a long moment and then, without saying another word, she put the flash drive into her bag. "I'll make sure this gets out, but you need to be ready. Once this story breaks, there's no turning back. They'll know who you are, and they won't stop until you're gone." The weight of her words hit me like a freight train. I had thought I was ready for the consequences, but hearing them spoken aloud made me realize just how much I was risking. There was no going back now. The company would hunt me down if I wasn't careful. We made arrangements to stay in touch through encrypted messages, and I left the cafe feeling both relieved and terrified. Megan would handle the exposure, but I had to prepare for the worst. The company would come after me, that much was certain. And when they did, I would need to be ready. For the next few days, I stayed off the grid. I didn't go to work and I didn't answer my phone. I rented a small, nondescript apartment in a quiet part of town, changed my identity, and started making plans for what came next. Then the phone call came. I stared at it for a long moment, my heart hammering in my chest. The caller ID displayed an unknown number, but something told me I couldn't ignore it. This was it. The moment I had been dreading. They had found me. I hesitated, but I couldn't just let the call go unanswered. Slowly, I picked up the phone and brought it to my ear. There was a long pause before a cold, familiar voice spoke. "Hello, Daniel, we need to talk." I didn't recognize the voice immediately, but the words were chillingly familiar. It was the voice of someone who had power, someone who controlled the situation. I felt the blood drain from my face as I realized what was happening. The company knew. They knew everything. "Who is this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "You already know," the voice replied. "This is Cavarius. We've been watching you." I didn't respond, my mind racing as I tried to figure out how they'd found me. Had they traced the phone call? Were they already outside my door? "You've made a mistake," the voice continued. "You think you can expose us, but you don't understand the consequences. We will find you, Daniel, and when we do, you will wish you had never thought about crossing us." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The words were not a threat, they were a promise that would be carried out with brutal efficiency. But something inside me snapped. I had already come this far. There was no turning back now. "I'm not afraid of you," I said, trying to sound confident even though my voice trembled. "I'll make sure the world knows what you've done. I'll make sure they can't hide." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could almost hear the person on the other side weighing my words, deciding how to respond. Then finally the voice spoke again, this time with a sinister edge. "You think you can just walk away from this? You're in deeper than you realize. Do you really think anyone will believe you? Do you think the press will protect you once we're done with you? We will make sure you disappear, and when you're gone, no one will remember your name." With that, the line went dead. I dropped the phone, my mind spinning as panic set in. They were going to kill me. There was no other way to interpret that call, and it wasn't just me they were after. They would come for anyone who helped me. Megan. Anyone who had even the slightest connection to the truth I was trying to expose. They would wipe us out without a second thought. I knew what I had to do now. I had to make the first move. If I was going to survive this, I had to be proactive. The company was already hunting me down, and I couldn't afford to wait for them to strike first. I went straight to the one place they would never expect me to be, the office. It was risky, I knew, but I needed something from there. I had to get into their main server room. There I could find everything. The files, the communications, the irrefutable evidence that would tie Cavarius to the human experimentation, the black market organs, the illegal genetic modification programs, and the bodies that had been discarded. With this, I could take them down for good. I slipped into the building under the cover of darkness, using the back entrance I had memorized during my time at the company. There were no guards at this time of night, but I still moved with the quiet stealth of a shadow. Every step was calculated, every noise a potential alarm. When I reached the server room, I hacked into the system using a backdoor code I had created. It took a few minutes for the system to bypass the firewalls and encryption protocols. But once I was in, the floodgates opened. I downloaded everything, the blueprints of the company's darkest secrets. Data streams, internal communications, emails from high-ranking officials, everything I needed to prove the horrors they had been hiding. As I stood there waiting for the files to transfer, I heard a noise, a footstep, then another. Someone was coming. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't have much time. I grabbed the flash drive from the terminal and ran. My pulse was pounding in my ears as I sprinted through the darkened hallways, praying I wasn't about to be caught. If I was, there was no way I would make it out of the building alive. I reached the back exit and burst through the door, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but I wasn't safe yet. The real danger was just beginning. As I sprinted through the alley, I saw a black van pull up at the far end of the street. The headlights hit me like a spotlight, and I knew they had found me. A group of men jumped out of the van, all wearing dark suits and masks. I didn't recognize any of them, but I knew exactly who they worked for, the same company that was going to kill me. I ran faster, adrenaline fueling my every step. My legs were burning, but I pushed myself harder. I turned a corner and dove into another alleyway, hoping to lose them in the maze of city streets, but they were relentless. The sound of footsteps grew louder. They were gaining on me. Then suddenly I heard a voice. It was Megan. She was standing at the entrance of a nearby building, waving frantically for me to come to her. "Daniel, hurry," she screamed. I didn't hesitate. I ran toward her and she pulled me inside just as the men chasing me rounded the corner. The door slammed shut behind us and we were safe for the moment. Megan grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with fear. "What the hell happened? Who were those guys?" "They're from Cavarius," I said, gasping for breath. "They know everything. They won't stop until I'm dead." Megan's face paled as the gravity of the situation hit her. "What now?" I glanced at the flash drive in my hand. The evidence was our only hope now. "We expose them," I said, my voice shaking but resolute. "We expose everything." The following days were a blur. The world around me had suddenly transformed into a dangerous, high-stakes game where every move could be my last. I had the evidence, the damning proof of everything Cavarius had been hiding, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. The company was everywhere. Their reach was far too wide and their resources too vast. If I wanted to expose them, I had to act fast, and I had to be smarter than they were. Megan and I spent every waking hour preparing. We worked from the shadows, reaching out to journalists, hacking into secure forums, creating anonymous accounts to leak information without revealing our identities. We knew the risks, but the stakes were too high to back down now. But Cavarius was always one step ahead. Every time we uploaded a piece of evidence to a public site, it was quickly taken down. Every time we reached out to someone, they were either silenced or disappeared. The company had an iron grip on the media, the government, and law enforcement. It felt like we were playing a game of whack-a-mole, where every time we struck a blow, another threat emerged. And then, on the night everything changed, we made a breakthrough. One of the journalists we had been in contact with, a reporter named Claire, had contacted us in secret. She had infiltrated Cavarius's media arm. She had gained access to their internal communications and had uncovered something that none of us had expected, something bigger. Claire called me late one evening, her voice shaky but filled with urgency. "Daniel, you need to hear this. I've found something that could bring them down once and for all." "What is it?" I asked, feeling a spark of hope for the first time in days. "I've got my hands on the source code for the software they've been using to erase all evidence of their wrongdoings. They've been using a backdoor program to cover their tracks on every illegal operation they've ever run. All the files, they're not gone. They're just hidden. If we can access that program, we can reverse everything they've done, expose every last detail." I froze. This was it. The key to bringing down the entire empire Cavarius had built. "But Claire," I said, my voice trembling with fear, "do you realize what this means? If we release this, we're not just exposing them, we're unleashing chaos. It could destroy everything, everyone connected to them. It's not just Cavarius at risk. It's the entire political system, the economy. They have their hands in everything." She was silent for a moment. I could hear her breath on the other end of the line, a steady rhythm of someone who had thought long and hard about the consequences. "I know," she finally said, "but they've been controlling everything for too long. They've ruined too many lives. They can't keep getting away with it." She was right, of course. They had ruined my life. And they were still hunting me down, but it wasn't just my life at stake anymore. It was everyone's, every person they had manipulated, bribed, and destroyed for the sake of their own gain. It was time to end it all. The plan was set into motion that night. Claire provided us with the access we needed. She had a hidden terminal, a secret point of entry where we could remotely access the software and release the data. It was a long shot. The company's firewalls were nearly impenetrable, but Claire had figured out how to slip past their defenses without triggering alarms. She had done it before. We couldn't do it from our apartment. It was too risky. So we made our way to an underground data center Claire had rented for this very purpose. She had thought ahead, preparing a place where we could work in secret, away from the prying eyes of Cavarius's security systems. Megan and I arrived first. The data center was a cold, concrete building, illuminated only by the dim glow of red emergency lights. The hum of servers echoed through the corridors, a constant reminder of how much information was being processed and stored beneath our feet. It felt like stepping into a tomb, but it was our only chance. Claire arrived shortly after, her face pale but determined. She had brought with her a laptop, a small device that would allow us to access the server that held Cavarius's most closely guarded secrets. The final piece of the puzzle. We got to work immediately. For hours, we sat in front of the monitors, watching as Claire typed furiously, bypassing security protocols, weaving through layers of encryption. I could feel the sweat pouring down my back. My mind raced with thoughts of the people I loved, of the lives we were about to change or destroy. This wasn't just a corporate scandal anymore. This was an act of war. "We're in," Claire said suddenly, her voice tight. "I've got full access to their internal server." I swallowed hard. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. The moment that would either destroy us or set the world on fire. "Do it," I whispered. Claire began to run the program. Lines of code began to scroll across the screen, each one a confirmation that we were one step closer to pulling the curtain back on the darkness Cavarius had built. The files, the ones that had been erased, hidden, and buried, began to appear on the screen. Every transaction, every document, every email, the full scope of their crimes, the human trafficking, the genetic experiments, the secretive deals with the government. It was all there, every bit of information we needed to take them down. And then suddenly the system locked up. The screen flickered. "Claire," I said, panic creeping into my voice. "They've detected us," Claire muttered under her breath. "They're activating the countermeasures. We have to get out of here now." Before we could react, the building's lights went out. The room was plunged into darkness. I could hear the sound of doors slamming, footsteps approaching, and voices shouting in the distance. "They're here," Megan whispered, her voice trembling with fear. It was over. They had found us. And now we were trapped. The darkness in the data center felt suffocating. My heart pounded in my chest as the sound of heavy boots echoed down the hallway. Cavarius's security was here. They'd found us. "Claire, we need to move now," Megan hissed, her voice a frantic whisper. We couldn't waste any more time. The walls were closing in, and if we didn't escape, everything we had worked for would be lost. We scrambled for the back exit, our breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and I could hear the telltale click of radios being activated. They were looking for us. The building was crawling with their agents, ready to silence anyone who dared to expose their secrets. "Through here," Claire motioned, leading us to a narrow service corridor at the far end of the room. It was a tight fit, and the air smelled musty, but it was our only chance. If we could reach the emergency exit, we might just make it out alive. We moved quickly, but every step felt like an eternity. I could hear voices now, too close for comfort, and the sound of their radios crackling, signaling that the search was narrowing in on our location. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone, trying to send the final batch of evidence to the encrypted email accounts we had set up. This was our last chance to expose them, and I couldn't fail now. Just as I pressed send, the lights flickered back on, and a loud crash echoed behind us. "Stop right there," a voice rang out deep and cold. It was one of the security officers. They had found us. There was no time to think. I grabbed Megan's hand, pulling her forward, my legs moving faster than they had ever moved before. We had to outrun them. Claire was already ahead, a few steps ahead of us, but the sound of the guards pursuing us was deafening. I glanced over my shoulder and my stomach dropped as I saw them round the corner. There were too many. We couldn't outrun them all. "Take the door," Claire shouted, her voice desperate. "Go, get out." We pushed forward and finally reached the emergency exit, Claire yanking the door open just as the first guard rounded the corner. A flash of light from his flashlight illuminated the room for a split second, but we were already through, running into the alleyway behind the building. I could hear the alarms blaring inside the building. The door slammed shut behind us, but that didn't stop the chaos. We were still a long way from safety. The streets were empty at this time of night, and the cold air bit at my skin as we sprinted toward the nearest car we had parked earlier. There was no way we could walk out of this clean. They knew who we were now. They would be hunting us until the day we died. We reached the car, and Claire threw open the back door, motioning for us to get in. "Go, go, go," she shouted. Megan jumped into the front seat, slamming the door behind her, and I slid into the back. Claire got in last, locking the doors and starting the engine. We pulled away just as another car with dark tinted windows sped past us, its headlights flashing. "They're following us," Claire said, her voice shaky but determined. "But we can lose them." We swerved down the dark streets, our tires screeching as we made sharp turns, but I could see the black car in the rearview mirror, relentlessly pursuing us. They were fast and they were not going to let us escape. "I have an idea," Megan said, her eyes narrowing as she glanced at me through the rearview mirror. "We need to split them up." I blinked, confused. "What are you talking about? Watch this." With a sudden jerk of the wheel, Megan swerved into a narrow alleyway, making a sharp right turn. Claire cursed under her breath, but she didn't argue. The car behind us followed, but just as they did, Megan took a sharp left, causing the pursuing car to be momentarily blocked by a parked truck. The car slammed to a halt. I looked back in time to see them struggle to regain control, but the seconds we had bought were crucial. Megan stomped on the gas and we shot forward. "Hold on," she said, her voice steady now. "We're almost there." We were almost home free. Almost. But just as the tension seemed to lift, the screech of tires filled the air once again. I looked over my shoulder and saw another black car speed toward us, this one blocking our exit. "Not good," Claire muttered, her eyes darting to the side. "They've got us cornered." We couldn't outrun them anymore. The only option we had was to confront them, but we couldn't just surrender. Not now, not after everything we'd done. I had to make sure this wasn't the end. "We have to fight," I said, my voice colder than I felt. "We can't let them win." Megan looked at me in the rearview mirror, her face set with determination. "You're right. We have no choice." In that moment, everything seemed to slow down. It was a split-second decision, one that would define the rest of our lives. I reached into my bag and pulled out the encrypted USB drive, the final piece of evidence we had, the one that could take down Cavarius once and for all. "Claire," I said, my voice firm. "Get ready." I opened the door of the car, the cold air rushing in, and hurled the USB drive toward the street in front of us, where it bounced and landed in the middle of the road. The black car screeched to a halt just as one of the security agents opened the door and dashed toward the street to retrieve it. The second he touched the USB, he froze, his body trembling. I watched in silence as his expression changed from confusion to horror. The moment he made contact with it, a series of flashing lights began to blink across the USB, and a loud alarm sounded from within the car. It was a decoy, an explosive device. In the blink of an eye, the car erupted into a fiery explosion, sending debris flying everywhere. The remaining agents jumped back in shock, but it was too late. The explosion had destroyed the vehicle, and with it, the last link to Cavarius's hidden network. We didn't wait for any more. Megan hit the gas and we sped off into the night, leaving the wreckage and the company behind us. It was over. Cavarius's empire had fallen, but we knew that this was just the beginning. The fight for justice would never end, and we would never stop until every last shadow of corruption was erased from the world.